What lurks in the darkness when you sleep? I took the overnight shift because I needed the money and because I'd always believed I was immune to the dark. It's a habit you get from long commutes, from exams that demand all-nighters, from answering emails under the gray hum of a desk lamp until the shapes of a room forget they were ever supposed to be friendly. I don't own blackout curtains. I never unplug my hallway's nightlight. The dark never had the power it had over other people. That's what I told myself when the agency sent me to cover 2 nights of data collection at the Maris Sleep Institute. Backup technician, key phrase, light duties. The regular tech was sick, the coordinator said. I'd be letting in one participant, showing them to the sleep room, setting up the sensors with a checklist, and monitoring the screen while they slept. There would be templates for everything. You'll be bored, she said, chirpy like bored was a threat. Bring a book. It wasn't in a tidy medical building. The institute was tucked into the ground floor of a complex that had started life as a sanatorium and then tried on several uglier costumes over the next century. Convalescent home, shelter, storage. Its newest renovation had been partial. A fresh logo mounted over the original stone lintel. A clean vestibule with a sign-in tablet and a pot of succulents. A hallway of glossy eggshell paint fighting to look modern while the bones underneath complained in their old language. And there was that smell. No renovation can fully scrub. The sweet, dusty cool of a place where people have spent long hours in pain. The coordinator, whom I only knew by her pasted-on smile in the welcome packet, would not be there. She'd left me the door code and the alarm instructions and said she'd be available by phone until 9. I arrived at 8:30. My first impression was that the lights were dim, not low exactly, but filtered, like daylight through heavy curtains. The lobby lamp was on a motion sensor. It brightened when the glass door closed behind me and faded again while I stood consulting the map. The clinic had 4 rooms: control, sleep room A, sleep room B, and a corridor with a bathroom and a break nook. The break nook held a refrigerator humming like it was whispering to itself and a microwave with a naked coil inside. I turned a corner and the hall changed temperature. The air grew so cool my forearms prickled. Temperature control, I said aloud, a habit of mine when I'm alone, like pushing air into a balloon so it doesn't collapse. The thermostat in the hall was set to 16 degrees Celsius. There was a post-it beside it, "Do not adjust while running study." A second note in smaller, thinner handwriting, "We like it cold." The control room was what you would expect, a central desk with monitors, a small mixing board for microphones, racks of annoyingly blinking equipment. There were cupboards labeled in block letters, EEG, ECG, SpO2, CPAP, camera. Above the desk was a picture window looking into sleep room A. That room looked like a small hotel room had been shaved down to an outline. A single bed with a white duvet, a low table with a ceramic lamp, a chair, a static art print of an ocean horizon, blackout curtains drawn over a half window that was mostly painted shut. At the foot of the bed, a camera eye blinked red within its infrared housing. The laminated checklist lay on the desk just as promised. It told me how to log the participant, run a pre-sleep questionnaire, place a nasal cannula and a pulse clip, scrub the scalp spots, and place the EEG electrodes. It reminded me of acronyms as if I might forget. EOG for eye movement, EMG for muscle tone. It said monitor with lights on until stage N2, then dim to 20%. It do not speak to the participant after lights out except to ensure safety. There was no participant. I checked the schedule on the clipboard. Tonight, subject 14, female 24, complains of vivid dreams and episodes of sleep paralysis. Arrival window, 9 to 9:30 p.m. Compensation, €200. The coordinator's last note at the bottom of the page: if she no-shows, you can run a self-trial for calibration. We'd appreciate the baseline. A smiley face. I smirked at it. We who? The motion sensor light in the hall clicked off. I waved a hand at nothing, and it paled back on. Something about that slow return made me think of a person feigning sleep and trying to open their eyes without being noticed. I made coffee. I wiped the already clean table. I checked my phone, no signal. The Wi-Fi network called Maris staff required a password I didn't have. The coordinator's number rang twice and delivered me to voicemail. I looked at the window into sleep room A and then opened the intercom to test it. "Hello, hello," I said to the empty bed. "This is the tech. My voice returned a fraction of a second later out of the ceiling as if someone above me was mocking my cadence. By 9:40, my subject had not arrived. I peered through the inner door toward the building's deeper halls, dark, a night closing in an inch at a time from the edges. The street outside was already quiet, the kind of October quiet that steals between the seams of a city after dinner. I texted the coordinator. Subject 14 didn't show. Running self-calibration? I received no reply. Fine. It was, after all, what I'd been hired to do. Sit and watch someone sleep. The someone could be me. I set up sleep room B for myself because it had a recliner as well as a bed, and the recliner felt more honest. I left the door to room B open and the control room's door ajar so the sightlines made a crooked funnel of light between the spaces. Every time the hall light dimmed, I flicked my wrist and watched it gather itself again. The EEG paste was cold on my fingertips. I parted my hair in rough lines and scrubbed the alcohol swabs over my scalp until the skin smarted, then pressed the little silver cups into place and taped them down. The wires drew together into a tail that I connected to the amplifier on the bedside stand. I looped the oximeter over my finger. I threaded the nasal cannula over my ears. By the time I had everything placed, my reflection in the dark window looked ghosted and festive, somewhere between cyborg and saint, and the sensors on screen were reading. Little waves, responsiveness to my blink, a slow sawtooth of breath. The amplifier's LEDs pulsed in time with me. Lights to 20%, I read off the sheet and tapped the dimmer. The lamp obeyed. The night outside seemed to thicken in response, like an animal pushing back against a hand from the other side of a glass wall. I lay down. I breathed. The cannula tickled my lip. I told myself that this was completely normal. The main light in the control room stayed on, turned toward the window like an attentive lifeguard, and I decided to leave it that way. "You'll be fine," I said under my breath, and my words, routed through the intercom, visited me a second later from the ceiling. "You'll be fine." The air system sighed and the temperature took one careful step lower. A floorboard in the control room made a shifting sound like a weight settling. I told myself again, old building, ductwork. The camera's infrared clicked quietly, cycling modes. I closed my eyes and let the black at the edges creep inward, not like a threat, but like the tide. In, out. I woke to the clock's second hand ticking toward midnight. I had not meant to drift. I'd been practicing a sleep onset routine, a handful of slow, counted breaths, testing it on myself before the monitoring system had stabilized. The style of drifting, however, was wrong. There was a sticky seam at the edge of my sleep that I had never felt before, like popping out of molasses. My throat was dry. There was a taste like pennies on the back of my tongue. I turned my head. The amplifier's LEDs poured their calm green and amber. The screen beyond the glass showed my EEG in long-distance mountain ranges. A small flag had appeared on the chart that I hadn't set. Sniff. There were 5 of them in a row, equally spaced, each with a time code attached. The third had a different color, like a video editing marker not meant for my hands. Their timestamps were 23:47, 23:47:30, 23:43, 48:30, 23:49. Somewhere behind the wall, the air system exhaled through the vent, but the sound had become a little more human. I realized it was because the vent whistle was now in a rhythm that matched my marked sniffs. Each half-minute, a drawn taste of air, thin and wet, as though through teeth. Gooseflesh rose over my arms up to the edge of the tape. I grew suddenly, ferociously aware of the cannula prongs inside my nostrils and the smallness of the distance between them and my brain, thinner than a finger. The smell in the room had changed, too, less like the clinic's bleach, more like damp wool left in a bag overnight, a winter closet that hadn't been opened in too long. "You're fine," I said again, reflex. My voice climbed the ceiling and dropped onto my face. The pauses between the marked sniffs kept arriving like footsteps coming down an iron stair hidden behind the wall. I stamped that idea out. Artifacts, I told myself. The amplifier had picked up a rhythmic vibration from somewhere in the building and flagged it. A train going by, a fan with a bad bearing. I pushed myself upright, peeled back the blanket, and navigated my tail of wires until I could stand at the window. The control room was empty. The door to the hall was an unlit rectangle. My coffee sat on the far desk with a skin now and the small ghost of steam a memory above it. The clock hit another half-minute. The vent took another quiet, strained breath. "Not possible," I said, and the top of my scalp, where the electrodes were most sensitive, answered with a prickling awareness that wasn't exactly a sound and wasn't exactly feeling. It was a picture, the kind I sometimes got during migraines, more like a shape than an image. A black bowl, dented, resting just behind the plaster, a place where the air went in but did not come out. I turned away from the window and shook my head like I could knock the thought loose. The tape tugged hair. The wires whispered against one another, and I swore softly and then laughed, stupidly, for the sound of it. "Data is data," I said. "Check the source." I freed myself from the bed's loop of cords and stepped into the control room, dragging my unfamiliar tail. There's a particular squeak to the control room's floor that comes from old wood, varnished many times, and my shoe made it because I knew the floors of buildings even when I had been in them less than an hour. I know where the grain is shallow and where it is deep. I stepped around the squeak. I sat at the desk. The cameras showed the bed where I had been. My form was a faded white ghost in the infrared, from the residual heat or from my brain trying to make a person out of negative space. On the data capture, the sniff markers were labeled, not by an algorithm, but by someone's actual hand, the same thin handwriting from the post-it. Sniff, 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 sniff. "What?" I said, and the intercom obliged, and the room named it back to me. The building exhaled, and this time the breath rose in temperature just enough that my eyes watered. I opened the supply cupboard, because for all the horror I was making for myself in the tight skin of my skull, I had worked in labs. When something is wrong, you do something. You test. You roll your chair back from the screen, and you verify the mundane. I traced the cannula line to its small plastic coupler, noted that the recording was indeed reading my breath rate. I followed the line to the port in the wall and felt the faintest tug of suction there, the system's pressure check. The lines were balanced. The microphones were keyed correctly. My eyes wandered, though, between checks, the way eyes will. First to the ocean picture. The horizon was tilted a little, I realized, not enough to be a choice. Then to the static red exit sign in the hall, which had no business needing to be on motion detection. Then to the part of the window where my reflected head sat under the camera's red eye like a tiny carnation pinned to a suit, and to the darkness behind me. When I turned back to my screen, something had changed in the EEG. A cluster of spikes stood out like fence pickets. There was a new set of markers, neatly placed at 10-second intervals, like the footfalls of a careful, deliberate person in a stairwell. The first marked, blink. The second, blink, blink. The third, long, pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth hard enough it hurt. "I didn't," I said, uselessly. My eyes had been open. The black bowl behind the wall took another small, careful taste. "Enough," I said. I reached for the intercom to turn it off, my own voice too unnerving as a delayed visitor, and my hand touched only cold. The dial had been turned all the way down to 0. The voice that had sat on my face a second after I spoke had not come from the speakers. I looked at the clock and felt like I had spent more time looking at the clock than anything else, as if time was now a tangible object taking up the space in the room, standing in my way like an armoire. It ticked to the vent breathed. The urge to rip every wire from my body and leave was a swift animal that didn't make a plan. It only made a direction. I rose, and my wires complained, and the chair's wheels murmured and hit, unavoidably, the squeaky board. The squeak wasn't a squeak this time. It was a small voice, pleased, like a toe pressed into a floorboard that knows it is hiding cash. The hall's motion sensor clicked off. The dark stepped in, not absolute but thicker than before, like a body pressing flat against the glass from the other side, its nose making a smudge. I reached for the control room door and froze because the glass in the window of sleep room A did what glass should not. It let me see something that could not have been me, or the past of me, or the camera's afterimage, standing by the bed. Across the bed, on the far side where the vent was. In the infrared, it was only a whitening of black, an outline softer than a seam, but it was there, and my brain had not put it there because my brain could not have made that shape. The absence with shoulders too narrow and head too high, as if something with the wrong joints was deciding how to be a person. Its hand, if I let the word hand be an indulgence, rested at the edge of the mattress as if testing the spring. I stared until my eyes burned and my lower lids inked with a need I could not meet. My body wanted to water my eyes. It would force me to blink. I knew from the markers that blinks were counted. Something else also knew. I swallowed and the cannula twitched in my nose, as if someone else had the other end of it, as if someone was ready to reel me in. I did a thing I had not done since childhood, when the night got darker than the air. I spoke my name out loud. I said it like it might attract someone who knew it. Hearing your own name in your own voice is the strangest magic. It doesn't prove anything. It just puts a stake down. I found the thermostat on the wall and felt a moment of childish, almost comic relief. Buttons. I pressed the up arrow. Heat would lift and dry the air, I thought. Heat would change the way a cold thing moved. The thermostat beeped, but did not change. The post-its words did not change either. Do not adjust while running study. The second note beneath it, we like it cold. A third, scratched so fine I hadn't seen it before, it makes you sleepy faster. There was the twist, though I didn't accept it then. The building wasn't trying to soothe patients. It was trying to drown them. It wanted the weight of dark on our bodies. It wanted the lids to fall. Okay, I said, because the voice that says okay can be a tool. Okay. I pulled the tape from my skin at the corner, carefully so I wouldn't rip hair or electrodes loose, and then messily, because the careful was taking too long. I rounded the desk and made for the hall. Behind the door, the motion light came on reluctantly, a sickly glow, and then dimmed. I waved both arms at it like a frightened pedestrian in traffic. It warmed slightly, as if embarrassed. I moved toward sleep room A, so I could go into it and see the far side of the bed and see nothing there, which would have been a quick and easy fix for the condition of my spine. I had taken 2 steps when the intercom, which I had turned down, murmured in my ear again. Not my voice, someone else's. It sounded like a mouth close to my shoulder. The words were almost worse for being kind. Close your eyes, it said like a nurse trying to do a painful thing quickly. I didn't run, but I changed the way I walked to the speed that makes your teeth click if you aren't careful. The door to sleep room A opened when I pushed, and a small eddy of colder air pressed the hair on my arms the wrong direction. The lamp on the table was still at 20%, enough to show a bed's surface like a calm lake in a dark room. I stepped around the wall niche and looked at the space between the bed and the wall. There was nothing there. I laughed then. I did. It was a pained sound, but it was real. It loosened my shoulders. I went to the vent grating and crouched and put my hand against it and felt the thready breath of the system moving air. Not haunted, I told the vent, stupidly. Just old. Something inside took a breath with mine. It didn't change the pressure or the temperature. It didn't sing. It matched me a half-beat later, almost petulant, almost playful. Not a machine, not a mirror, with a little wet at the back of it, a novice mouth, a thing practicing. I stood, a slow unfurling because fast would mean loss of control, and I stepped back until my shoulder blade met the corner of the wall and stopped. The room was not big. The presence of a bed made it smaller in the way furniture does, crowding space with rectangle laws. The camera above the door clicked, its red dot winking like a drowsy eye. The blackout curtain over the window had no gaps. I knew because I checked with the flat of my hand, sliding it along the seam to make it crack light if it could. There was light on the other side of the curtain, street light or morning after. The fabric refused it. A darkness that refuses light is a different creature than an honest night. The intercom whispered, sibilant and pleased, "Good." It didn't say it loudly. The word was a flop of breath on a tile floor. I left the room without looking back. I had no good reason to look back. I moved along the hall past my room, wires trailing, and into the break nook, because I hadn't thought of there until then, and break nooks are where you keep knives as well as microwaves, and suddenly knives were relevant and microwaves make light. I opened a drawer. Instead of knives, there were scalpels in a sterile packet, mundane, clinical, stamped with dates. My hands shook as I slit the packet. The metal inside was no heavier than a set of keys. I did not want to cut anything. I wanted to have the idea of cutting in my hand like a talisman. In the mini fridge was a plastic jug of cold strong tea, labeled in the same thin hand for participant, decaf, lavender. A second, identical jug, unlabeled, had a cap already loosened. The smell coming off it was not lavender. It was lay-still syrup beneath something chemical, sweet and synthetic, the way cough medicine is heroic sweet to cover its plan. I closed the fridge, and my hand left a sweat print on the handle. I could see in the overhead light, like the ghost of a hand in a window, soon to fade. "Okay," I said. "Okay." Back in the control room, I went to the panel beneath the desk where the emergency lighting controls sat behind a metal flap. The flap had been sealed with tape that had yellowed and cracked. I peeled it. Inside were 3 toggles: all on, all off, and locate. Below them, a key switch I did not possess. The all-on toggle had been pinned with a bent paper clip, another human hand's compromise with a system. My own human hand through it. For a second, the clinic realized it had been running a trick and remembered how to be what it was supposed to be. Light shook itself everywhere like a dog out of water. The hall fluorescents hummed and brightened. The lamps in both sleep rooms jumped to their full ordinary wattage. The infrared camera made a soft click like a tongue being tutted. The smell in the rooms changed again, thinner, more ashamed. The vent breathed, and then, for a space I could count out on the clock, it didn't. It held its breath. During that held breath, I winked. It was not voluntary or directed by anything other than the reflex built into every animal that can make tears. I couldn't stop it. A blink is so quick that you can fit many crimes inside it without any law noticing. The intercom used the space the blink made to lean right against my mouth and speak with my breath. "Thank you," it said. It didn't mean the light. I reached for the power strip beneath the racks, and I cut power to the intercom and the camera system with a single swift palm. Silence is never silence in an old building, but the quality of the sound changed with the intercom off. It went from someone else leaning their shoulder to the door to me alone in a room with my bones. The hum of equipment still held. The low light's fluorescence still sang its cheap petition. The vent did its job. But the voice had lost its microphone. I turned to the data capture, even though I didn't want to, because the data capture was proof of whether I had been doing this to myself. On the screen, the EEG traced long, gentle waves that belonged to stage N1, the border country. My EOG revealed the soft, traitorously slow lack of saccades I associate with the minute before I drop. A new series of markers had appended themselves in the thin hand. Almost, 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 yes. I lifted the mouse. The cursor moved. I selected the last marker and deleted it. It came back. I selected the second to last and changed it to no. It turned itself to yes. The third marker turned itself, like a dog hurrying to please a friend who is already opening the door, to almost. Across the glass, the vent pulled breath in a second after I did and made it wetter when it gave it back. There is only so long you can fight your own lid. There are tricks. Blink one eye at a time, rub your thumb into your forefinger, bite your tongue. But tricks are stitches on a torn curtain. After enough pressure, the fabric will gap and show what's on the other side. I did each trick. The scalpels lay in their plastic tray on the desk with their tidy, clear clamshells open like dry mouths. The tea in the pitcher made a slow slip of cold along the glass like a person licking their lip. Change the rules, I told myself. If it moves when you blink, stop seeing with your eyes. I dug in the cupboard again and found a roll of black gaffer tape and an old compact mirror the coordinator had likely used to check electrode placement. I taped the mirror to the wall opposite the window of sleep room A and angled it so I could see the bed in its reflection from the control chair. That let me keep my eyes open in another direction, while the camera, if it was still sucking in my breath to season its personality, got only the side of my face. When I sat again, the bed filled the mirror's oval like a picture taken of a hotel's worst feature. Nothing there. And then, I am not foolish enough to dramatize this with a lie. It shivered. Not a camera glitch, no lines, no digitization, a change in the way the bedspread creased by millimeters. The fabric sank. The vent exhaled a damp, pleased sigh. I understood the game then. It wasn't a grand revelation, more like a quiet acceptance of the rules in a dream. It would only be where I could not see. It lived in the fraction of dark I made when I let go of my vigilance. It could move between the frames. My nervous system dropped. It would wait for my body to betray me, because bodies do, and it would lay itself over my face like a second skin and try on my breath to see if it fit. Sleep paralysis, I thought, but the idea was a weak tea for what was in the cup. Sleep paralysis is your own body binding itself with rules so you don't run into the furniture during a dream. It is the old brain keeping the animal safe while the new brain outpaces it for a while. This was not that. This was a thing who used that rule the way a person uses a dark room to learn where a stranger keeps their keys. Okay, I said again, and now my saying it did not help. If it is fast when you blink, what is it when you sleep? The scalpel felt heavier now that I wasn't pretending it was a friendly object. I went back into sleep room B and sat on the bed with my wires trailing like sympathetic snakes. I lifted the scalpel and took the tape and cut 2 careful strips. I pressed 1 strip under each eyebrow and another on each eyelid so that my lids were held open in a stupid human attempt at being clever. It worked badly. It pressed tears into the wells and they spilled. My vision blurred. My eyes burned. I blinked anyway, behind the tape, the lids shuddering helplessly against their new rule. I lay back and took the CPAP mask from its crevice in the wall where a previous patient had rested it between studies. I fitted it over my nose and mouth, and with one clumsy hand, changed the hose connection so the mask would receive, not give. The system's positive pressure was mild, designed to keep throats from closing, not to empurple the face of something that wore me. But it was another rule to add to the pile. If you come to take my breath, you will meet the force of air that says no. I turned the lamp up to full. I opened the app on the control screen that controlled the camera's infrared flood and turned it up as far as it would go. The room became a pale imitation of daylight, pretending to come through cloudy glass. The building didn't like it. The vent stuttered. The white noise generator, set to soft surf, warbled and then settled, singing a wrong note while it returned to its pattern. The thermal camera overlay that had only been for textile amusement flicked on and off like a faulty alert and tagged the air by the vent with a smear of pale yellow that didn't belong to any human temperature. I lay my head down and watched the mirror's oval on the opposite wall through my burning eyes. The bedspread in sleep room A made a second, more definite lipping inward where no weight was, and then, in the space of a heartbeat, I could not stop even with a scalpel. A handprint deep in the blanket. Not a human hand. 4 long joints and an opposition digit set a little too far down the palm. The edge of the print was wet when it lifted. It left a dark kiss of damp, as if the air had a tongue that had rested there and found the flavor to its liking. They say the dark just shows you yourself. They say sleep paralysis is a mask your heart puts on to explain your body to your brain. I watched the pressure mark bloom and in the mirror watched the corner of the bed dip and didn't feel explained to. I felt like a person lying on a table while a wave takes the legs of the table's shore and considers whether to take the rest. Close your eyes, the intercom said again, quiet, not pleading, like a mother reminding a child to say thank you. And it always sounded kinder when the lamp was bright, which made me angrier than being scared. No, I said. My taped eyes ticked water. The CPAP blew a small, insistent wind. It did not leave. Why would it? It had a job, and I had made myself easy to carry. It took each of my exhalations and counted them. It learned my pauses the way you learn the sentences of someone you love when they lag so you can lift them. The white noise machine pretended to be surf and became instead the hush of a tongue pulled across teeth. The markers wrote themselves at 10-second intervals. Almost, almost, almost ready. I made the mistake then of thinking of what would happen in the morning, and the thought cost me. I thought of how I would pull the electrodes from my scalp and scrub the paste away and laugh at myself in the mirror for being a child in a well-lit room. I thought of coffee that had not been in the refrigerator's small mouth overnight. I thought of calling the coordinator and telling her with a bright voice that the equipment had glitches. These thoughts were people I had invited in advance and set chairs for, and while I went to the door to greet them, my body blinked. Deep, under tape. My eyes rolled upward in the old honest theater of sleep. The mirror caught just the beginning of the approach, A quick, limber fold of the mattress, a cloud of breath condensing where there was no mouth, and then my vision hazed, full of water. Something full of a more patient water leaned from the edge of the bed toward me, not fast, not slow, like a curtain deciding which way to sway, curious. The vent made the sound I had now learned as the sound it made when it was eating. What do you do when the thing that wants you will only exist when you are not looking? You count. You count because counting is the rope people throw from ships to see how deep they are. You count because numbers are barns you can put your panicked horses into. I counted and made a rule in the counting. My count will not be regular. I will not let it learn me. I breathed in 1, held for 2, breathed out for 3, 5, in for 2, held for 1, out for 5, 3, a child's game that wasn't, because numbers were the only tool I had left. It paused, a breath after mine. It does not like rules it did not make, I thought, and had the pleased, ridiculous sense of winning a point. Close your eyes, the intercom said once more. Almost not there, faint, delicate. I reached with my fingers under the bedclothes of sleep room B and closed them around the plastic body of the white noise generator installed there for patient preference. While keeping my eyes, who sweated and cried and somehow still worked, on the mirror, I tugged its cord from the wall. The room became an honest room again, the kind a dog would recognize, with only air and light making their faint animal sounds. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door moved on its hinge, or someone taller than doors brushed against one with their shoulder. I did not look. I only lay with the CPAP blowing persistence into the bridge of my nose and my eyes taped open like a terrible doll, and counted numbers in a pattern from which no lullaby could be learned. The presence did not move back. It did not leave. It did not show itself in any way that would make a photograph mean anything in daylight. It did, however, begin to make a sound I almost did not hear, not breath, which it had learned the taste of, but a small choked swallow of a laugh, like trying a new mouth shape. It made it when I miscounted, when 3 arrived too soon, when I made a 1-2-5 that tried to become 1-2-4 by habit. It made it when my jaw unclenched and a soft vowel fell into the room without my permission. We were both then, waiting to see who would get bored first. The animal in the wall with time for tide, or the animal on the bed who was built to sleep. Here is the part of the story where cleverness is supposed to arrive. The trick with the mirror, the silver coin in the mouth, the torch that does something light has no science behind. I had none. I had only a body, so I gave it what bodies do. When the clock in the control room ticked to 3, a soft and meaningful hour even in a modern city, I clenched the scalpel tight in my palm until the edge bit, and my hand surged with a pain that was not unmanageable, but was unignorable. I held my breath for 7 counts and let it out in a laugh, a wet one, as if someone else had told me a joke. The mirror showed a long dark indentation moving onto the bed in sleep room A, as if an aunt who means well were leaning with both hands to kiss a forehead. I pulled the CPAP mask from my face, turned it around, and held the hissing mouth of it up like a shield. When the thing that had no face lowered itself to try on mine, it met a stream of air strong enough to make the tape on my eyes flutter. It recoiled, swift and animal as I had feared it was not, and flattened, an instant's black, into the seam of the wall. The vent pulled a long, angry breath that had a noise in it like a cat in a bag. "Not tonight," I said through my teeth, shocking myself with the fact that I wanted to sound brave to whatever it was, that a part of my body always wanted to perform for a superior power. "Not tonight," I said again, and set my finger on the power to the entire lab, like a person threatening to blow their house's mains if the burglar won't go. I would have thrown it. I would have plunged the rooms into black that was blacker than before and found out what lurks in that, too. Perhaps that is the stupidest thought I had. It didn't call my bluff. It does not love light. It is, in the old stories, a thing who sits only where the moon does not. It pulled itself back into the drywall and went somewhere only rats dare. In the mirror, the bedspread smoothed itself grain by grain, as if breathed upon by an old woman with infinite patience. I did not sleep that night. The clock's numbers made their slow parade in the dawn, which, even here, even through a blackout curtain, has a softness light bulbs cannot pretend to, bent itself under the door, and moved across the floor in a shape like water under a bridge. My eyes, taped, burned until I felt I had sand in them, but my lids stopped fighting, a bruise learning it cannot swell any further. I watched the mirror until my sight became a silver flaring lake. When the building's bones remembered they were in a city and commerce moved and trucks woke the ground a little, I started to laugh for real. The bad laughter of someone who is not, if they are honest, entirely out of the woods. At 7, my phone caught a signal and buzzed with a backlog of texts. The coordinator sent, sorry, emergency. Are you okay? Then, no participant tonight. Can you do a baseline? And finally, if you can do both nights, we'll pay a bonus. I tore the tape from my eyes and cried without dignity. Then I cried because it hurt. Then I laughed again for the luxury of being able to cry and laugh. Then I dressed and scrubbed the paste from my hair until the skin was hot and red and clean. The scalpels went back into their tray. The tea went down the sink with the stopper pulled to keep the smell from rising. I set the thermostat to 21. The vent whined. A child told no, and then settled, sulking, into a normal cycle. I told myself, because daytime is generous, that I would not come back that night, that I would leave a message begging off, that no amount of money could sell me to a thing that needed me to close my eyes. At 5, I called the coordinator. I told her I'd be in by 8:30. I'm not brave or foolish. I'm something worse. I'm curious, and I cannot stand a rule that pretends to be a law. The vent had its way of moving air. I had my way of making patterns for it to trip on. I went back because a part of me needed, like an itch, to find out whether I was the only one it wanted, or whether it lived in that building like mold, ready to put on whatever face fell against it. I went back because the thought of anyone else sleeping under that vent was like a hand around the root of my throat. The second night, I did not tape my eyes. I brought a small mirror and a headlamp, and tapes with eyes scribbled on them like a school joke, and a metronome app set to an irrational interval, a frequency that would not resolve neatly. I brought a cheap fogger used by DJs that I had bought at a thrift store months ago for a Halloween party and never used. I did not cut power to the intercom, but I set a loop of white noise that was simply a recording of the room's silence. I did not drink the tea. I made coffee with water I boiled and watched boil. I taped the mirror in places the cameras did not see. I put the fogger on the floor and let it push a little cool mist against the vent. The mist showed me the way the air moved in the room. The first time the vent inhaled, the fog went not into the duct but sideways into the seam of the drywall and disappeared. It came the same way, patient, as if we had a standing appointment. I kept my eyes open until I couldn't, and then I blinked, and then I blinked again, and it came closer only when I was kind to myself, when I allowed myself the pity of an eye's old need. When it was close enough to touch, I breathed in deep and held and turned the headlamp on at the top of my breath and counted down from a prime number in a language I used rarely. It recoiled. It came back. It is not offended by light, only slowed, and the slow is enough to make my life last as long as it has. We did this until morning, a courtship of rules, an exchange of breath, a map of what we each could do. On the third night, I did not return, because there was no third night, because I told the coordinator the truth in a gentle voice, and she, after a long pause, said, "We will be closing for renovations soon," as if she had just learned it then. She thanked me profusely and sent the payment with the bonus and asked me to delete any copies of the data I had exported, and I said I would, and I did, except for one excerpt, a strip of EEG, where the markers have written, in a hand more patient than mine, almost, and the word yes blooming out of them like a flower in a time lapse. You expect me now to warn you about falling asleep near vents, or to advise you to keep a nightlight on, or to tape your eyes. I'm not that kind of storyteller. We come with what we can carry, and sometimes the things that live in buildings make uses for us we didn't agree to. I can only give you rules that worked for me. If you feel the room get a degree colder in a careful way, as if the room were making a decision, notice what your eyes are doing. If you hear your own voice a fraction too late, find the source of the voice. If a lamp on a dimmer makes you feel calm, ask whom the calm is for. If your bed seems to remember a weight you didn't put on it, breathe in a way you would never breathe on purpose. Count badly on purpose. Lie to it until it stops telling you the truth it prefers. And if you wake in the small hour with a mouth on your face that is not yours, if the weight on your chest is not a dream but a student learning the shape of you, do not be kind. Do not perform your sleep. The dark loves your performance. Be inelegant. Be the living animal your body spent 100,000 years becoming. Open your eyes in the sloppy way a child does when it has cried too much. Show it that you can breathe more wrong than it can parse. Show it you have a light it doesn't own. What lurks in the darkness when you sleep isn't always malicious. It can be merely hungry, merely curious, the way you or I might lean in a doorway when we smell bread and want to see who made it. But hunger is a law only to the hungry. The other day, after a night in a place that wasn't my own, I woke in the blue, early morning of a borrowed guest room with the taste of pennies at the back of my tongue. The vent made a tiny sound like a hand on a doorknob, not turning, just there. I lay very still and counted 11 and then 6 and then 0 like an idiot, and then laughed at myself, a small, unkind inward laugh, the kind the intercom made when I slipped. I didn't tape my eyes. I rolled and let daylight find my eyelids from the side, and I said my name out loud. The house, old, ashamed of itself, remembered how to be a house and gave me the sound of a garbage truck outside and a rusty faucet somewhere in the flat above and the smell of someone's toast only just burning. The vent decided to do what vents do. I drove home. I did not check my rearview mirror, not for the reason you think. I didn't check because the light was right and my eyes were tired, and I have learned not to put my gaze in a place it does not need to be. Distrust what asks you to look away from the road to see it. If you come over some afternoon and fall asleep on my couch, and people do, it is soft, it is forgiving. You will find a little metronome on the side table ticking an odd number, and a cheap mirror glued to the ceiling at an angle an interior designer would teach me a lesson for. You'll think I'm eccentric, which I am. You'll be safe. Tonight, when you go to bed, when the night kindly closes its hand over your eyes, if you feel again that weight that your doctor or the internet will tell you is your own body preventing you from running into the furniture, consider me and my ridiculous tape and do something ugly. Breathe like you don't know how. Laugh a little. Call your own name so the person who knows it best can come keep you company. And if something in the wall laughs back, a small damp sound like someone tasting a new word, don't offer it your best breath. Keep that for morning. It is the light's favorite drink. It will be there, on your kitchen counter, in the steam that curls from your cup, in the mirror where your eyes will look bloodshot and ordinary. You will have, for another day, learned to be something's inconvenient meal. What lurks in the darkness when you sleep always wants you to be beautiful at it. Be ugly, be awake wrong. Dream on purpose. Make yourself a pattern that doesn't resolve, and when you feel the bed under your shoulder dip where no shoulder lies, don't forget to say thank you to the day when it comes. Not because you survived, the word is too dramatic, but because survival is a practice, and it looks from the outside exactly like the small, graceless things people do in ordinary rooms, while the vent pretends to be a wind that means nothing.